Fernando de Noronha Noe 3/4 A squared E, is an archipelago of 21 islands and islets in the Atlantic Ocean, 354 km offshore from the Brazilian coast. The archipelago got its name from the Portuguese merchant Fernando de Noronha, to whom it was given by the Portuguese crown for services rendered regarding wood imported from Brazil. The main island has an area of 18.4 square kilometers and had a population estimated at 2,718 in 2012. The area is a special municipality of the Brazilian state of Pernambuco, with about 70% established in 1988 as a national maritime park. In 2001 UNESCO designated it as a World Heritage Site because of the importance of its environment. Its time zone is UTC-0200 all year round. The local population and travelers can get to Noronha by plane or cruise from Recife. An environmental preservation fee is charged from tourists upon arrival by Ibama. Geography, Geology. The islands of this archipelago are the visible parts of a range of submerged mountains. It consists of 21 islands, islets and rocks of volcanic origin. The main island has an area of 18 km2, being 10 km long and 3.5 km wide at its maximum. The base of this enormous volcanic formation is 756 meters below the surface. The main island, from which the group gets its name, makes up 91% of the total area. The islands of Rata, Sail na Jainta, Cabeluda and Zao Poundo Josa copyright, together with the islets of Li Poundo and Vivar make up the rest. The central upland of the main island is called the Quicksaba. Flora. The United Nations Environment Programme lists 15 possible endemic plant species, including species of the genera Capparis noronha, Ceratocynths noronha, Chaoponia noronha, Moriotica noronha, Sirius noronha, Palicourea noronha, Guettada noronha, Bumelia noronha, Physalis noronha, and Ficus noronha. Fauna. The islands have two endemic birds the Noronha alaenia and the Noronha vireo. Both are present on the main island. Noronha vireo is also present on Ilirata. In addition there is an endemic race of ear doves Cinada auriculata Noronha. Subfossil remains of an extinct endemic rail have also been found. The archipelago is also an important site for breeding seabirds. An endemic sigma-dontine rodent, Noronomys vespuccii, mentioned by Amerigo Vespucci, is now extinct. The islands have two endemic reptiles, Amphisbaena ridla and Trachylepis atlantica. Marine life. The life above and below sea is the main attraction of the island. Sea turtles, dolphins, albatrosses and many other species are frequently observed. Climate. The climate is tropical, with two well-defined seasons for rainfall, if not temperature. The rainy season lasts from March to August, the rest of the year sees little rain. The temperature ranges, both diurnal and monthly, are unusually slight. History, discovery. Many controversies mark the discovery of the archipelago by Europeans. At least three names, Zao Poundo Lorena Secciono, Zao Poundo Joe Poundo, and Quaresma, have been associated with the island around the time of its discovery. Based on the written record, Fernando de Noronha Island was discovered on August 10, 1503, by a Portuguese expedition, organized and financed by a private commercial consortium headed by the Lisbon merchant Fernando de Noronha. The expedition was under the overall command of Captain Gomes Seccionalucarelho and carried the Italian adventurer Amerigo Vespucci aboard, who wrote an account of it. The flagship of the expedition hit a reef and foundered near the island, and the crew and contents had to be salvaged. On Coelho's orders, Vespucci anchored at the island, and spent a week there, while the rest of the Coelho fleet went on south. In his letter to Soderini, Vespucci describes the uninhabited island and reports its name as the Island of St. Lawrence. Its existence was reported back to Lisbon sometime between then and January 16, 1504. When King Manuel I of Portugal issued a charter granting the island of St. John as a hereditary captaincy to Fernando de Noronha. The date and new name in the charter has presented historians with a puzzle. As Vespucci did not return to Lisbon until September 1504, the discovery must have been earlier. Historians have hypothesized that a stray ship of the Coelho fleet, under an unknown captain, may have returned to the island to collect Vespucci, did not find him or anyone else there, and went back to Lisbon by himself with the news that his ship had been lost. The captain who returned to Lisbon with the news is unknown. This account, reconstructed from the written record, is severely marred by the cartographic record. An island, named Quaresma, looking very much like Fernando de Noronha Island, appears in the Cantino planisphere. The Cantino map was composed by an anonymous Portuguese cartographer, and completed before November 1502, well before the Coelho expedition even set out. This has led to speculation that the island was discovered by a previous expedition. However, there is no consensus on which expedition that might have been. The name, Quaresma, means Lent, suggesting it must have been discovered in March or early April, which does not correspond well with the known expeditions. There is also a mysterious red island to the left of Quaresma in the Cantino map that does not fit with Fernando de Noronha Island. Some have explained these anomalies away by reading Quaresma as Anaresma, and proposing that the red island is just an accidental ink blot. Assuming Quaresma is indeed Fernando de Noronha, then who discovered it? One proposal is that it was discovered by a Royal Portuguese mapping expedition that was sent out in May, 1501, commanded by an unknown captain and also accompanied by Amerigo Vespucci. According to Vespucci, this expedition returned to Lisbon in September 1502, just on time to influence the final composition of the Cantino map. Unfortunately, Vespucci does not report discovering this island then. Indeed, he is quite clear that the first time he saw the island was on the 1503 Coelho expedition. However, there is a letter written by an Italian saying that a ship arrived from the Land of Parrots in Lisbon on July 22, 1502. This could be a stray ship from the mapping expedition that returned prematurely, or another expedition altogether, about which we have no information. The timing of its reputed arrival makes it possible that it stumbled on the island sometime in March 1502, on the homeward voyage, well within Lent. A third possible theory is that the island was discovered already in 1500, shortly after the discovery of Brazil by the Second Indian Armada under Pedro Alves Cabral. After his brief landfall at Porto Seguro, Cabral dispatched a supply ship under either Gaspar de Lemos or André Copyright Gomes Section Alves back to Lisbon, to report the discovery. This returning supply ship would have returned north along the Brazilian coast and might have come across Fernando de Noronha Island, and reported its existence in Lisbon by July, 1500. However, this contradicts the Quaresma name, since the returning supply ship was sailing well after Lent. A fourth possibility is that it was discovered by the Third Indian Armada of João Paulo da Nova, which set out from Lisbon in March or April 1501, and arrived back on September 1502, also in time to influence the Cantino map. Chronicler Gaspar Correa asserts that on the outward voyage, the Third Armada made a stop on the Brazilian coast around Cape Santo Agostinho. Two other chroniclers do not mention a landfall, but do report they discovered an island. So it is possible that the Third Armada may indeed have discovered Fernando de Noronha Island on their outward leg. However, the timing is very tight. Easter landed on April 11, 1501, while the estimated departure date of the Third Armada from Lisbon ranges from March 5 to April 15, not leaving enough time to reach those environs within Lent. As a result of these anomalies, some modern historians have proposed that Fernando de Noronha is not depicted on the 1502 Cantino map at all. Instead, they have proposed that Quaresma Island and the accompanying red ink blot are in fact the Rocas Atoll, slightly misplaced on the map. This reserves the discovery of Fernando de Noronha Island itself as indeed on August 10, 1503, by the Gomes Section Coelho expedition, as originally reported by Vespucci. The transition of the name from João Paulo to Fernando de Noronha was probably just natural usage. A royal letter dated May 20, 1559, to descendants of the Noronha family, still refers to the island by its official name of Ilha de João Paulo, but already in other places, For example, the logbook of Martin Afonso de Sousa in the 1530s, it was referred to as the island of Fernando de Noronha. The informal name eventually displaced the official name. 1500 Euro 1700. The Lisbon merchant Fernando de Noronha held not only Fernando de Noronha Island as a hereditary captaincy but also a commercial monopoly on trade in Brazil. Between 1503 and 1512, Noronha's agents set up a string of warehouses along the Brazilian coast, and engaged in trade with the indigenous peoples in Brazil for brasilide, a native red dyewood highly valued by European cloth makers. Fernando de Noronha Island was the central collection point of this network. Brasilide, continuously harvested by the coastal Indians and delivered to the various coastal warehouses, was shipped to the central warehouse on Fernando de Noronha Island, which was intermittently visited by a larger transport ship that would carry the collected loads back to Europe. After the expiration of Noronha's commercial charter in 1512, the organization of the Brasilide enterprise was taken over by the Portuguese crown, but Noronha and his descendants retained private ownership of Fernando de Noronha Island itself as a hereditary captaincy, at least down to the 1560s. 1700 Euro 1900, Captain Henry Foster stopped at Fernando de Noronha during his scientific survey expedition as commander of HMS Chanticleer, which had set out in 1828. As well as surveying coasts and ocean currents, Foster used a Kato variable pendulum to make observations on gravity. He took the island as the point of junction of his double line of longitudes setting out his survey. He was given considerable assistance by the governor of Fernando Noronha, who let Foster use part of his own house for the pendulum experiments. The longitude of Rio de Janeiro taken by Foster was among those on one side of a significant discrepancy, which meant that the charts of South America were in doubt. To resolve this, the Admiralty instructed Captain Robert Fitzroy to command HMS Beagle on a survey expedition. One of its essential tasks was a stop at Fernando Noronha to confirm its exact longitude, using the 22 chronometers on board the ship to give the precise time of observations. They arrived at the island in the late evening of February 19, 1832, anchoring at midnight. On February 20 Fitzroy landed a small party to take the observations, despite difficulties caused by heavy surf, then sailed on for Ban, Brazil that evening. During the day, the island was visited by the naturalist Charles Darwin, who was one of the Beagle's passengers. He took notes for his book on geology. He wrote about admiring the woods. The whole island is one forest, and this is so thickly intertwined that it requires great exertion to crawl along. The scenery was very beautiful, and large magnolias and laurels and trees covered with delicate flowers ought to have satisfied me. But I'm sure all the grandeur of the tropics has not yet been seen by me. We had no gaudy birds, no hummingbirds, no large flowers. His experiences on Fernando de Noronha were recorded in his journal, later published as The Voyage of the Beagle. He also included a short description of the island in his 1844 geological observations on the volcanic islands visited during the voyage of HMS Beagle. 1900 2010. In the late 18th century, the first prisoners were sent to Fernando de Noronha. A prison was built. In 1897 the government of the state of Pernambuco took possession of the prison. Between 1938 and 1945, Fernando de Noronha was a political prison. The former governor of Pernambuco, Miguel Reyes, was incarcerated there. In 1957 the prison was closed and the archipelago was visited by President Juscelino Kubitschek. At the beginning of the 20th century, the British arrived to provide technical cooperation in telegraphy. Later the French came with the French cable and the Italians with the Talsable. In 1942, during World War II, the archipelago was made a federal territory, which included Rocos Atoll and St. Peter and Paul Rocks. The government sent political and ordinary prisoners were sent to the local prison. An airport was constructed in September 1942 by the United States Army Air Force's Air Transport Command for the Natal-Dakar air route. It provided a transoceanic link between Brazil and French West Africa for cargo, transiting aircraft and personnel during the Allies' campaign in Africa. Brazil transferred the airport to the jurisdiction of the United States Navy on September 5, 1944. After the end of the war, the administration of the airport was transferred back to the Brazilian government. Fernando de Noronha Airport is served by daily flights from Recife and Natal on the Brazilian coast. In 1988, Brazil designated approximately 70% of the archipelago as a maritime national park, with the goal of preserving the land and sea environment. On October 5, 1988, the federal territory was dissolved and added to the state of Pernambuco. Today Fernando de Noronha's economy depends on tourism, restricted by the limitations of its delicate ecosystem. In addition to the historical interest noted above, the archipelago has been the subject of the attention of various scientists dedicated to the study of its flora, fauna, geology, etc. The jurisdiction is considered to be a separate entity by the DX Century Club, and so is visited rather often by amateur radio operators. In 2001, UNESCO declared Fernando de Noronha, with Rocas Atoll, a World Heritage Site. It cited the following reasons: a. The island's importance as a feeding ground for several species, including tuna, billfish, cetaceans, sharks, and marine turtles, b. A high population of resident dolphins and, c. Protection for endangered species, such as the hawksbill turtle and various birds. In 2009, Air France Flight 447 disappeared off the northeast coast of Brazil. It was presumed to have crashed into the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Fernando de Noronha. Rescue and recovery operations were launched from this island. Conservation and environmental threats. Most of the original vegetation was cut down in the 19th century, when the island was used as a prison, to keep the prisoners from hiding and making rafts. Also, invasive species have been introduced: linseed, intended for use as cattle feed. Tiger lizards introduced in the 1950s to control a rat infestation. Ironically, that did not work out, because tigers are diurnal and rats, nocturnal. Now the lizards themselves are considered a plague, feeding mostly on bird eggs. Rock cave is introduced by the military in the 1960s as hunting game for soldiers. Economic indicators. The archipelago of Fernando de Noronha in 2005 had a gross domestic product of $22,802,000 and a per capita income of $10,001. The Human Development Index district state was estimated at 0.862. The only banking center in the archipelago is a branch of Banco Santander Brazil. There are one or two additional ATMs around the main island. Tourism. The beaches of Fernando de Noronha are promoted for tourism and recreational diving. Due to the south equatorial current that pushes warm water from Africa to the island, diving to depths of 30 to 40 meters does not require a wetsuit. The visibility underwater can reach up to 50 meters. Gallery. References. Bibliography, De Ortlight Mari Antigo Mapa do Brasil and Hista Cubria da Coloniza Picavolt Poundo Portuguesa do Brasil, Volume 2, pp. 221 €81. Green-Lee, W.B. The Captaincy of the Second Portuguese Voyage to Brazil, 1501–1502, The Americas, Volume 2, pa 3–13. Rukuma, E. Brazil in the Cantino Map, Imago Mundi, Volume 17, pa 7–26, external links. Works related to Fernando de Noronha at Wikisource, Portuguese, Fernando de Noronha official website, tourism, English, a photo tour of the island pvv.org, English/German, information provided by a local resident, English, Fernando de Noronha Atoll das Rocas Moist Forests. Terrestrial ecoregions. World Wildlife Funder, English, audio interview with Fernando de Noronha resident about life on Fernando de Noronha, videos, Fernando de Noronha National Park, Noronha beaches and underwater, Noronha scuba diving.